Nick, thank you for having me again. It's so nice hanging out on campus again with you.
Yep, exactly. You can see what the students get up to during the day.
Exactly, lots of hanging out, and obviously studying. Nick, you just had a conference here. Tell us all about it. What were you hosting? There's 300 papers or something like that were contributed?
We had about 100 papers submitted. We ended up having 30 on the program.
Okay.
It was, analysing the future of remote work, hybrid, future of work, impacts of AI. I mean, I'll tell you one interesting paper was on AI. There's very strong evidence that firms that adopted working from home, not necessarily, typically not fully remote, typically actually hybrid, were more advanced in adopting AI.
Okay, interesting.
And the author's view was that, look, it's, work from home is a new technology. You've got to reorganize, restructure. It's not easy to do it, and you become more digitally native. And if you get that right, it's easier to adopt AI as well.
Interesting. And is that because of companies just are leaning forwards into more innovation, or perhaps they're more inclined to new ideas as well, or is that not in the data?
I think it's the flexibility.
Okay.
So, to tell you the truth, the paper sees a correlation. So it's hard to know why. I mean, you're looking at tens of thousands of data points. So you just see that firms that adopt work from home, but again, this is not typically fully remote. This is firms that letting employees work from home 2 days a week, are more likely to adopt AI. And then, a lot of discussion is why. And the authors from his read of the papers and from talking to firms says it's a lot about just that flexibility to change. Because 2020 comes along, and if you're able to change and reorganize your structure, there's a broad discussion over AI over what's called the J curve. Mm-hmm. So the J curve is the idea that productivity follows this J curve. Initially it drops, and this is all the AI slop and the struggles to implement it and time wasted. And in the long run it goes up a lot. And the speed of which you get through that initial drop, I think, is also related to how flexible you are and how good you are adopting other things like flexible working practices.
And data keeps on finding, it's like all rivers flow into Nick Bloom's data pool is what it feels like. There's some new data out, you were just saying over lunch, from the Atlantic Fed. What's coming through there?
Yeah, the Atlanta Fed was a fascinating survey. So we surveyed almost 1,500 firms across the US. So their size and industry representative of the US. Typical firm in this has about 250, 300 employees. There's a big spread. So these are senior, largest companies, and we typically get the CFO. And so there are two key findings. One is about 20% of employees across the US are working from home on any one given day, and that seems stable. So that's kind of here to stay.
And that's grown from?
It was, give you figures, it was 7% before the pandemic. It was 50% in the peak of the pandemic, and it's back down to 2025. So it's like down versus 2020, but way up versus pre-pandemic. And firms say, look, this ain't changing very fast. I mean, some firms are going up, some are down, but on average. So the two things that were interesting. One was there was just a big variation across all firms in any narrow industry or region. So there's just, every which way seems to be out there. This kind of links to the second finding, which is we asked CFOs primarily, what do they think the impact of working from home on productivity was? 3 groups. First group is companies that have everyone in the office 5 days a week and say they could work from home, but we don't want them to.
Right.
They claim it's minus 12%, so very negative.
Negative 12% on productivity.
Of work from home.
Okay.
And that kind of aligns with the fact they don't let anyone do it.
And who was interviewed again?
CFOs typically.
Okay.
Second group is companies that are operating hybrid. On average, they said working from home was about minus 2% on productivity, which is negative, but it's small.
The benefits of happier employees.
The benefits, turnover is lower. I mean, normally the numbers you hear is employees value it about the same as 8% more salary. So if you think, effectively you can kind of save yourself 8% on salary, and if you lose 2% on productivity, net, that's still a good deal.
Ramp time, yep.
And then the third group were CFOs, some CEOs of firms that are primarily remote. And they told us productivity is 8% higher, they think, when employees work from home. And my takeaway on this is like asking people what their favorite food is. Some are going to say Italian, French, Thai, Mexican, maybe British even, if you're lucky.
Not many.
But
I don't know, it's okay.
But no one's good. It's not like we're converging.
Sure.
I mean, if you ask 10 years from now, you're still going to get a mix.
Yeah.
And so I think we're just in this.
How are they measuring productivity though? Like when the CFO goes, they're more productive or not?
We just asked them we literally asked them the question, what do you think the impact of working from home versus on business premises is?
So it's more qualitative right now.
Yes, although when you ask, 1,500 people a number, you tend to, I mean, most people get a sense. I agree that if you look at, typically you see these survey responses, there's a lot of bunching at 5, 10, 15%.
Right.
So I think where we are is, partly there's a difference in tasks. So call centers, coding is a bunch of stuff is often best done remote. A lot of professional activities are maybe hybrid, and there's Jamie Dimons and David Solomons are going to get you in. But the other thing is there's just a variation in opinions.
Right.
And I just don't think people are ever going to agree. If you ask what's the best city in the US or the world to start a new business, that's a perfectly reasonable question. Right. You'll get 10 different answers. So.
And it's interesting, I'm sure you're on Reddit seeing all the RTO threads and things as well. Like the conversation hasn't gone away. One of the things I've been reading about recently as well is that, hey, I've been forced to go back and I'm no longer working after 6 p.m. Like I'm just not giving any extra time to my company because they've kind of put this on me now. And they said, this is where you're expected to work. Therefore, I'm not letting it bleed around the edges at all. How do you think about that in terms of productivity? Like one of your data points, I think a few years ago, was there a lot less sick days with hybrid than there was fully.
That is correct. So the thing that's a struggle, if you're a company, and this is really true where we're now in the west coast of the US, that has to operate a lot across a lot of time zones, particularly really far-flung time zones. Work from home is your friend. So I was talking to a big 50 billion NASDAQ, the board of a big 50 billion NASDAQ company the other day, and they are primarily US, India, Brazil, China.
Right.
And they were saying they need some days a week each. They come in 3 days a week, they have 2 at home. Why? They said, employees are not going to do a 6 a.m. call to China if they're having to come into the office.
Yep.
And they're also not that keen to do it. They've got to, take the call and then go into the office later in the day.
Yep.
So they thought for connectivity across location, particularly time zones, allowing people to start and stop early or start and stop late, connected up. So that's one thing I hear. The other thing you hear a lot about is a lot of anecdote, but it's kind of matching the data. RTO requirements are rising.
Yep.
If you look at cell phone tracking data or swipe data, it's kind of flat. And this gap is this ever-growing compliance gap. And Brian Elliott and others have talked about this. A friend of mine was talking to him on Monday saying, well, we're supposed to be in 4 days a week, but no one seems to check, so I'm still just going in 2, and everyone else is. And he also said, whenever I'm in the office, all my meetings are on Zoom, which tells me that it's just not enforced.
Right. So you're speaking with a whole host of CEOs, leaders around the world, advising them. What's the one metric to drive performance in a company and how that company's working as a whole? Is there a modality that you're suggesting for work? What's the metric?
I mean, I'll give you this how it relates to space and work from home. So I'm actually writing a book, and you can save yourself whatever, $28. I can give you a strap line. One of the big strap lines is firms should focus on productivity, but they should also focus on cost. So to give you an example, there's a great example. I was talking at the Bellagio, actually it was a hotel in Las Vegas at an event last year. And the person talking before me was the CEO of Domino's Pizza. And vast, he's now just about to take over running Burger King. 2,000 people are there. Then I talked to afterwards and work from home. After I finished, this guy comes up to me afterwards and says, I run a taco restaurant and I love work from home.
Yeah.
And I'm like, where is this going? I was kind of figuring out, how could this be? And he says, look, let me explain. Everyone that cooks, cleans, serves food has to come in every day. No excuses, no questions. He says, but my back office, they're now fully remote. And he said, they're probably like 80-90% as efficient as in person, but he said they're 60% the cost, and it's phenomenally profitable. Yeah. And so first thing I always tell firms is think about costs, productivity as well as costs.
Right.
Because often what you see is the more remote you are, it's possible it degrades productivity. It depends on the activity, but it typically saves a lot of cost, including turnover costs.
Right.
So you should kind of put a number on them. Think about all the costs. Every time somebody quits, the typical estimate is it probably costs $30,000 to $50,000 to replace
One metric
them.
I've been hearing is cost per desk. One of our customers had about $15,000 cost per desk across their whole real estate. So once you include, leasing,
$50,000 per year per desk.
$15,000 per year per desk. Last week we spoke to one company where they're at $40,000 per desk per year. And now that's obviously leasing, maintenance, electricity, cereal bars, Diet Coke. But is there any kind of space metrics that you're seeing? Is it a desk to people ratio? Are you still seeing that drive to reducing real estate?
Yes, so hybrid often, I mean, you know, if you use Kadence, you can maybe get some space reduction, but hybrid, many firms I speak to are kind of struggling, to be quite honest, to save any space because everyone's wanting to come in on the same days.
Right.
So that hasn't, you know, there's a lot of disappointed.
Like an Apple Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday.
Yeah,
or
if you let teams choose, every team chooses Tuesday. Like no one wants to come in on Friday.
Yeah.
So, you know, you got this big empty office on Friday and Monday is like not so great. But if you're fully remote, or if you're down to a pretty low frequency, like 1 day a week, or to give you an example, Zoom. So I interviewed Eric Yuan at Zoom, and he said the sales folks come in Monday, Wednesday, engineering Tuesday, Thursday. And we said, like, why? You know, why are they coming in at all? He said, well, firstly, we need to be hybrid because that's what our customers are, and we need to eat the lunch we serve. And secondly, he said, we've grown a lot and we don't have enough space anymore. And so we do Monday, Wednesday, Tuesday, Thursday. And that's a pretty effective policy. Of course, it means you're only in 2 days a week. Once you come into 3, you're in trouble because, you know, you have this rotating. So generally, space savings have come from mostly or completely remote. Hybrid has not been a bit of a disappointment. Where it's benefited is from improved retention.
Yeah.
So again, you know, Society of Human Resource Managers estimate something like 6 months to a year of somebody's salary is the cost of somebody quitting on you. You know, that number seems big, but if you think about it, you got lost activity while they're away, interviewing, recruitment,
onboarding,
getting up. It's expensive, and so hybrid in the studies I've seen typically reduces turnover by 20-30%.
Okay, interesting.
So that's the payoff. It's not around space usually.
And so that's the payoff. But what must an office do to justify that? You know, in that instance, the $40,000 per desk. Is it faster onboarding for new recruits, younger recruits, mentorship? What must an office do to kind of justify itself? I mean, you obviously mentioned the productivity benefits there. I know MIT have got a study from the late 2010s about teams that are more adjacent to one another have a higher chances of producing patents and co-authoring papers together. What does an office need to do to justify?
The 3 things you hear, there's big 2 and then a distant third. The big 2 are mentoring, which is particularly critical for onboarding and getting people up to speed. So in fact, companies that tend to be mostly or fully remote, for example, Instacart, Dropbox, Zillow, generally don't have that much of a summer internship program or even hiring straight out of college because it's hard to get them up to speed. But mentoring critically in person, and the other is innovation.
Right.
So enormous amounts of evidence on, you have a meeting and sure that's fine on Zoom, but before and after the meeting, people kind of hang around and say, oh, by the way, damn, you know that thing in the meeting, I didn't feel totally comfortable about it. And then suddenly the true information comes out. So those are the big 2. The third, trailing, but it's still important, is building culture. And what do you mean by that? You mean kind of like we chat about our kids' soccer game or whatever, and you know,
time to trust.
And then you know, 2 weeks later I have a problem and I slack you and you respond to me because you know each other, whereas if I've never talked to you, it feels hard to kind of slack a stranger.
Has the technology stack evolved in the last couple of years? Do you think it's going to evolve again next year for helping companies manage all this stuff, from the usage of space through to, you know, I know you've been fascinated with a lot of the remote video tools as well over the last few years. Like, what's the tech stack evolved to become?
I mean, the tech stack is evolved, but it's very incremental. I mean, like, you know, we're on Kadence, and I know Kadence has progressed a lot, but if I was to think of hardware, really hasn't progressed that much. I mean, it's weird. We're in 2025. We're still using basically the same laptops.
The video conferencing, meeting
with
rooms.
the same little terrible cameras and nasty audio. We're still mostly on the same apps like Zoom, Teams, etc. So in a strange way, it's progressed much less. And I think my guess is, if you look 5 years ahead, there'll be some notably better software or hardware. You know, there's a company, Nora, that makes these huge screens. There's holograms. There's a guy on campus, Jeremy Bladen, that's doing a lot of stuff with virtual reality. These things aren't mainstream, but you know, if you've seen Star Wars, he's in the Jedi Council. That's the kind of thing I have in mind, like 5 years from now.
And 2025, there's been a lot of consolidation, or a lot of kind of the same progress has been made, or very little progress, I should say, has been made on every RTO mandate. You've got this great chart where it's like RTO mandate here, progression. Is that going to continue into 2026? I know many people are still, are we still having this conversation?
Well,
what's going to go into 2026?
I think if you look at the big RTOs in 2025, they are mostly for companies that are reducing headcount. So whenever now I see a company that's RTOing, I typically go and pull up its accounts, or you go back 6 months later and you see in its public listed accounts, its headcount's on a downward trend. So a lot of it is just managing headcount.
And is that from overhiring during the pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, take
era,
Amazon.
or?
I mean, they're very public about it. Amazon publicly said, look, we overhired in 21, 22, 23. We need to reduce headcount. That's why they did the 5-day return to the office. And then it turned out that not enough people quit. I don't know how many quit, 10% maybe, but they're needing to reduce headcount apparently by 30%. And so they're having additional rounds of layoffs. I mean, to state the obvious, the big problem with an RTO-driven headcount reduction is, the big upside is it's free. You don't have to pay redundancy costs. You also don't have to decide who leaves, which means it's logistically easy in the short run. Obviously, the big downside is you don't get to decide who leaves.
Sure.
And so imagine areas like cloud, AI, hot areas, your talent just walks out the door.
Got it.
So I think it's one of those short run good, long run bad type moves that over the next 6 months, it saves you a lot of money. But 5 years from now, your development's way behind because you've lost your top talent.
So talking about all data flowing to Bloom, Bloom empires, like what, if you're the CEO, let's go across the spectrum. If you're the CEO of a publicly listed Fortune 100 company, how are you choosing to let's say you've got 25,000 people, multinational, what modality of work is Nick Bloom choosing if you've got to get your stock price to jump again this year?
I'm going to tell you what is happening. So
okay.
I think what is happening aligns with what I would do. So, companies tend to be pretty well run in the Fortune 100, Fortune 500. So if you look at the flex data, what you see is 70% are hybrid for professionals and managers. I think it's about 20% that are fully in person and 10% fully remote. But that's just for professionals and managers. So take a big company, take 50K employees. You probably typically have 25K that come in every day. They, frontline staff working with equipment, customers, materials. They're already definitely in every day.
Yeah.
The question for some of them is whether you have a 4-day week under the guise of changing shift length and days. So I'm not pushing get rid of a day. I'm pushing maybe rather than 5 days a week on 8, you have 4 on 10 or 3 on 13. So that's really the only decision typically on these folks. Then the other 25K, you'll typically see about maybe 20K that are hybrid. There'd be professionals, managers. Typically they're in 3, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, home. And then you typically got 5K that are fully remote. Who are they? They tend to be back office, payroll, call centers, data entry. A lot of this stuff is moving overseas, and some of it's going to move into AI.
Interesting. And if you're an earlier stage company, you start remote by most instances right now, at least outside of YC and Dogpatch in San Francisco. You start remote. When does it make sense to get a small space, to be co-working with each other in terms of that faster ideation, the faster time to decision making? When does it make sense, do you think?
Well, here's the interesting thing. It's hard to think of a topic where there's more disagreement.
Okay.
If I talk to VCs over what the correct thing to do is.
Right.
There are some folks, like the YC folks, that are like, you got to be in person, you get the grind together and you're pulling these 80, 90-hour weeks and people are motivated and they're bumping each other. There are other folks that say, save on the capital, hire the best people globally.
Right.
You've got a bunch of founders. They're already motivated. No one needs to be looking over their shoulder. They can get on with it wherever they are. The evidence is kind of mixed. I'd say the research data actually slightly favors more remote. So if you look in large-scale databases, but I wouldn't say the evidence
unfair access to talent that they otherwise
is mainly around access
to
talent and like lean capital.
Right.
So you don't have to pay for an office lease and you don't have to pay for as much equipment. But I think the main thing I do here, I have a slightly more positive solution on, is for firms that are growing. I mean, Kadence is in this. I mean, you're already hybrid to start off with, but there are a bunch of firms that are growing fast that are fully remote, and they say we want an office presence, we want to move to hybrid. Generally, the advice is you want to cluster hire.
Yep.
So you want to pick a location, say Atlanta, and for the next 6 months, a year, you try and hire around Atlanta, and then you open a hybrid office, saying it's optional. Maybe a year after that, you start to nudge people.
Yeah, we've tried to do that. Product engineering in Northern Ireland, a lot of go-to-market in Salt Lake City, and then trying to hire in those hubs. Well, we do have, we are eating our own lunch too, as you said. We do have our own spaces as well. Earlier you spoke about companies, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about your book. you've spoken to companies not just thinking about performance, but also thinking about cost. Funnily enough, we're actually seeing that with a bunch of universities. So one of our biggest segments is higher ed, not the students using Kadence, but a ton of universities around the world. And they're doing it because they are trying to grow the student population.
Yep.
In the US, they've had no real additional Fed funding since 2009, and the students aren't wanting to pay more, their parents certainly aren't wanting to pay more, and so they're turning faculty space, admin space, as you kind of mentioned with Taco Bell there, into teaching space. We had this in SoCal recently. They went from 4 admin buildings down to 2, and they turned those other 2 into teaching spaces again.
Yep.
Is that what you're getting at with regards to like your cost efficiencies, not just performance of output?
Yes, certainly for universities, they're slightly in a strange situation. If you take Stanford, we own our land.
Sure.
So even we actually had a huge office extension program that opened in August 2019, which is not the best timing, as you can guess. And I think it's still, not entirely full. So we can't easily lease that back out to the private sector. What we can do is more efficiently use that space.
Yep.
And so exactly as you say, one thing would be if people are only coming in 2 days a week, have them share space and then use some of that for, say, teaching. And on main campus, potentially reduce some of the teaching space and have student accommodation. So yeah, I mean, in American universities, students are 2, 3, 4 to a room.
Yeah.
So there's a real shortage of space for accommodation. And it's classically repurposing empty office buildings into more accommodation. And to do that, you need to more efficiently use what you have.
And unbelievably, it's November already. So it's that favorite time of year for asking, what are your predictions for next year? What's the boldest thing that could happen in this space?
Boldest thing. I mean, the boldest thing, I tell you what, I give the best prediction is I actually think this topic is kind of calmed down.
Yeah.
The only the outlier could be, will the federal government change its mind? I'll tell you one long shot thing.
About its own return to office policy?
Yes, the reason is, one of the big research papers we've been working on is we see a very strong correlation between more work from home and higher fertility rates.
Yes.
So it's maybe not that surprising. There are various mechanisms you might have guessed, but you see if you or your spouse works from home 1+ day a week, you're more likely to have kids. If both of them do, fertility rates go up by about 1/3 of a child, which is an enormous effect. And we've been talking to a bunch of Asian governments where they're really worried about fertility, and they're kind of getting on board to this.
Interesting.
And in the US, the current administration is big on boosting fertility rates.
Yeah.
So will they change their mind? I think the reason the Trump administration was heavily against work from home is because of the Doge push to reduce headcount.
Great
now
efficiency,
that's taken its course. That's an outlier. I wouldn't be surprised.
And as one of the biggest landowners, certainly the biggest office user in the country.
Yeah, the federal government, and federal and state and local is something like 20% of the total labor force. So they changed their mind and said, hey, look, we like hybrid. We want our employees to spend more time with their families, have more kids.
Yeah.
That would be a major change.
Cool. Nick, thanks for taking the time.
Thanks very much, Dan. Great as always.